Alright, so today we're going to be making Espresso Granita. And so what our experiment is going to be is seeing the differences in making it with honey versus making it with regular granulated sugar. And so what we're going to expect from that is our regular sugar should be a lot more should crystallize a lot more, be a little bit more chunky and less smooth. And we would expect the honey version to be a lot more smooth and creamier. And that's due to the higher water content in the honey. We would expect that to be less crystallized. The different sugars that make up regular granulated sugar are going to be a lot more prone to that crystallization process. As well as that, we should expect to see a couple differences in the flavor. The honey obviously is a very different flavor, a little bit more distinct, has its own kind of flavor profile. So we should be able to see, some kind of differences in the flavor as well in these. All right, so the first step is going to be adding in our espresso. And so I went ahead and got just instant espresso. And on here, the conversion rate is 1 teaspoon for 2 fluid ounces. So each of these are going to contain 1 cup of espresso. So what I'm going to do is put a cup of water in each, and then we're going to go ahead and add 4 teaspoons of the powder into each of those, and that should be the equivalent of those cup of espresso in each. So we'll go ahead and do that now, and we'll show you when we're done. All right, so all we're doing here is just adding those 4 teaspoons into the water. 2, 3, 4. And then we're just gonna go ahead and stir that in, and then we'll do the same for the other bowl. All right, so next we're gonna add our sugar into this one. And so since we're splitting this recipe in half, instead of instead of a third of a cup of sugar, we're gonna add a 1/6 of a cup of sugar, which is the equivalent to roughly 2.5 tablespoons. So we're gonna go ahead and drop that into our mixture here. There's 1 tablespoon. There's 2 tablespoons. And then let me grab 1/2 tablespoon here. And then there's 3 tablespoons. So we're gonna let that sit. We'll add the zest in next, but for now we'll move on to the honey. All right, so next we're gonna add our honey here. As the book states, 1 tablespoon of honey is the equivalent to 2.5 tablespoons of sugar. So we're gonna put 1 tablespoon of honey in this one. And the reason behind that conversion rate is, like I said, honey is a lot denser as far as its sweetness compared to sugar. So even though we're using a significantly less total quantity of honey, it's still going to provide that same amount of sweetness as the sugar. All right, for our next step, we're going to zest our lemon and our orange here. For the whole thing, you only need about 1/4 teaspoon of zest. And so I'm just going to zest a bunch in here, and then we'll just get 1/8 teaspoon for each of these. So I've washed off the outside, and then we're just going to go ahead and zest them into this bowl until they get just about enough to be able to have 1/4 teaspoon for each. All right, so we got our zest here and our 1/8 teaspoon, and we're just going to put 1/8 into each one of our bowls here. So 1/8 into that, and 1/8 into that, and then 1/8 of the orange, and there we go. All right, so for our final step, we're gonna go ahead and add our Kahlua here. It's 2 tablespoons total. So we're just gonna go ahead and put a tablespoon in each of these. For that. One right there. And then we're just gonna stir this together so it's all nice and combined. And then once these are all nice and stirred up, we're just gonna put them in the refrigerator for about an hour to let them cool off. And then once that's nice and cold, we're gonna go ahead and put it in the freezer, and that's when we'll begin the freezing and crystallization process. All right, so our combinations have been chilled in the refrigerator for an hour, and I just put them into the freezer. So now we're gonna wait for ice crystals to start to form, and then we'll start stirring and get that crystallization process going. So this one in the front here is our honey, and then the one in the back there is our crystallized sugar. All right, so we finished the process of letting them freeze. As you can see, they're totally frozen now. All I did during the off time was just about every 15 minutes or so, stirred them a little bit. I will say the honey one took a little bit less or a little bit more time to freeze completely. And when I was stirring it, it was a little bit like less frozen each time. So the sugar one took a lot less time, but they're both frozen now. We're gonna let them thaw out just a little bit so they're easier to eat, and then we'll compare the textures and flavors. All right, so we've let the bowls thaw out a little bit here. Now they're nice and slushy. This is the honey one. It doesn't show up on camera very well, but it's a lot smoother and a lot less like crystallized than the granulated sugar one. This one's a lot less smooth. It's kind of flaky, a little bit more flaky. And as far as taste, not a huge difference. The sugar one tasted better in my opinion, and I think that's just kind of because honey has kind of a more distinct sweetness, whereas the sugar just kind of helped ease the bitterness of that espresso a little bit more. But yeah, they were both pretty good. As far as time was concerned, they took a little over 2 hours to completely freeze to get to that point. It didn't really specify in the book too much how frozen it wanted it to be, so I just kind of let it freeze completely through. But the honey one did take a little bit longer. I'd say probably like 20 more minutes to get to the same point. But yeah, overall good experiment. Learned a lot about the different sweeteners and how they interact in these dishes, and had a good dessert.